Before we begin and learn about the miracle that changed this widow's life forever, could you give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us down below from which corner of the world you're watching? I'd love to read your opinion at the end of this great life lesson. I declare that your home will be filled with health and blessings today if you subscribe by pressing the button below that says subscribe. It costs nothing, and you bring light to our community. Next to the subscribe button, you can also join our closest family with the join button. This way you'll have access to exclusive and much deeper stories made especially for you. In this way, you help us continue to tell these stories that touch the soul and in turn, help my family move forward. And if you wish to support us in a quick and free way, swipe the comments to the left, where a button that says IPAR will appear, and then press IPAR again. This will help the message of faith and justice from this story reach more blessed people like you. Now, prepare your heart because we are about to begin. The sky was weeping. There was no other way to describe that gray, leaden afternoon over the small town cemetery. The raindrops, cold as ice needles, beat mercilessly on the black umbrellas of the attendees. But María didn't mind getting wet. She barely felt the cold on her skin. The real cold, the kind that freezes the blood and stops the breath, was inside her chest. María, only 28 years old, felt she had aged a century in just 3 days. Before her, the simple wooden coffin of Antonio descended slowly into the dark hole in the wet earth. Every centimeter the box lowered was a violent pull in her heart, as if her soul were being ripped out piece by piece. Her hands, calloused from fieldwork, trembled visibly as she clutched a soaked handkerchief, useless now to dry the torrent of tears blurring her vision. "Papa," whispered a small voice beside her. It was Joshua, her little 6-year-old son. The boy, in his little black suit that was already a bit short in the sleeves, clung to his mother's skirt as if she were the only firm pillar in a world that was swaying. Joshua had his father's eyes, large and kind, and he looked at the scene with that terrifying mix of innocence and fear. He tried to be brave, pressing his lips together, but the trembling of his chin gave him away. María bent down slightly and stroked the child's damp hair. She felt a knot of fire rise in her throat, a bitter burning of helplessness. Antonio, her beloved Antonio, the man who had defended her from everything and everyone, was no more. He had left suddenly, leaving her in the midst of a family that had never accepted her. Because for the Garcias, owners of the best lands in the region, María was never more than the peasant girl, the woman without a last name who had bewitched their heir. The priest finished the final prayer with an amen that sounded dry and distant. People began to disperse quickly, eager to escape the rain and return to their comfortable lives. But María did not move. She approached the edge of the grave. She had a single white rose in her hand, a symbol of purity and eternal love. She raised her arm to toss the flower onto the coffin, a final gesture of love. But then, before the flower touched the air, a bony, strong hand gloved in black leather grabbed her wrist violently. The pain was sharp, physical, but the humiliation was worse. María turned her head, surprised. There stood Doña Elvira, Antonio's mother, her mother-in-law. Doña Elvira was 65, but she stood erect like a marble statue. She wore impeccable, expensive mourning attire, which contrasted cruelly with Maria's simple, worn clothes. Her eyes showed no sadness. They shone with a cold, calculating fury. She did not look like a mother who had just buried her son. She looked like a general who had just won a war. "Don't you dare," hissed Doña Elvira between her thin lips. Her voice was low but sharp as broken glass. "Don't dirty my son's grave with your cheap sentimentality. You don't have to pretend anymore, girl." María, stunned by the pain and surprise, tried to break free, but the old woman had surprising strength, fueled by years of bitterness. "What are you talking about, Doña Elvira?" María stammered with a broken voice. "He was my husband. I loved him." Elvira let out a brief, cruel laugh, a sound that froze the blood of the few onlookers still nearby. "You loved him," she repeated with sarcasm. "You loved his last name. You loved the security of having a roof over your head and hot food you didn't have to sweat for in the fields. But listen to me well, María, the show is over. The curtain has fallen. Antonio is in the ground, and with him went your protection." Little Joshua, frightened by his grandmother's aggressive tone, tried to intervene with his trembling child's voice. "Grandma, please, my mom is sad." Doña Elvira looked down at the child. There was no tenderness in her eyes, not a hint of compassion. She looked at her own grandson as one looks at a bothersome insect that has snuck into the house. "And you," she said with disdain, "you are the living proof of my son's mistake. Mixed blood, you have no place in my mansion, boy." It was then that Maria felt something stronger than pain. She felt a mother's rage. She broke free from Elvira's grip with a jerk and placed Joshua behind her, protecting him with her own body. "Insult me if you want, Elvira. Throw all your venom at me, but don't you dare look badly at your grandson. He's all that's left of Antonio." Elvira smiled, a malicious smile that foretold nothing good. She reached into her designer purse and pulled out something metallic and old. She extended it toward Maria. "All that's left, no, dear. There's the property, there's the land. There are the assets that belong to the Garcia family by right. And you are not a Garcia, you never really were. Take this." Maria looked at her mother-in-law's hand. In her gloved palm was a key. It was a large old iron key, completely rusted and ugly. It looked nothing like the golden, shiny keys to the big house where Maria and Antonio had lived for the past 5 years. Maria took the key with trembling fingers. The metal was cold and stained her fingers with reddish rust. "What is this?" she asked, feeling a terrible emptiness in her stomach. "It's your new home," Elvira declared, raising her chin arrogantly. "Because you're not going back to the mansion." Maria's world seemed to stop. The sound of the rain became a dull buzz in her ears. "Not going back, but Doña Elvira, all our things are there. Joshua's clothes, my memories, the toys." "Antonio is dead," Elvira shouted, losing her composure for a second. "And I am the owner of everything again. My lawyers have already reviewed the papers. The house is in my name. The car is in my name. You have what you brought when you came. Nothing. Well, I lie, you have a key." Doña Elvira took another step closer, invading Maria's personal space, forcing her to step back almost into the open grave. "That key opens the lock of the ruins on the hillside. Remember that piece of infertile land north of town? Antonio, in his romantic stupidity, put that plot in your name years ago as an anniversary gift. Well, there you have it. It's yours. Go there. The ruins." Maria felt the air leave her lungs. "Doña Elvira, for God's sake, that's a pile of stones. No one has lived there in 100 years. It has no roof, no water. I have a 6-year-old son. He's your grandson." "Then you'd better teach him to survive like the peasant you are," Elvira spat. "Because my employees have already taken your old rags out of the mansion, and I don't want to see you near my door. If you set foot on my property, I'll call the sheriff and say you're trespassing. Disappear, Maria, you and your bastard." Without another word, the old woman turned on her heel. Her chauffeur, waiting with the engine running and the heat on in a black luxury car, opened the door for her. Elvira got in without looking back, leaving the widow and the orphan standing under the incessant rain, beside the fresh grave of the man who had loved them. Doña Elvira's limousine disappeared around the curve of the cypress-lined road, splashing mud to the sides. Silence returned to the cemetery, broken only by Maria's sobs and the monotonous sound of the rain. "Mom," Joshua tugged on her sleeve. He was shivering. His lips were beginning to turn blue from the cold. "Let's go home now. I'm hungry and I want to take off these shoes. They're tight." Maria looked at her son and felt her heart break into 1,000 more pieces, if that were possible. How could she explain to a 6-year-old that they no longer had a home? How could she tell him that his grandmother had discarded them like trash? She knelt before him, ignoring that her knees were sinking into the mud, staining her black stockings. She took Joshua's cold little hands in hers and blew warm breath on them. "Listen to me, my love," said Maria, forcing a smile that cost her entire soul. We're going on an adventure." "An adventure?" asked Joshua, confused. "Yes, Papa. Papa left us a special place, a secret place just for us. We're not going back to the big house today." "Are we going camping?" "Camping in the rain?" asked the skeptical boy. "Brave explorers aren't afraid of the rain, son," lied Maria, feeling tears run down her cheeks mixed with raindrops. "We have to be strong. Papa is watching us from heaven and wants to see how strong we are." She stood up with difficulty. They had no car. Antonio had been the one who drove. They had no money in their pockets. Maria had barely had time to dress for the funeral before all the chaos began. The only thing she had was that rusted key in her hand and the clothes on her back. The ruins on the hillside were 5 km away. 5 kilometers of dirt road, uphill, in a rocky area forgotten by God, where only thorns grew and the wind howled like hungry wolves. They began to walk. The journey was an ordeal. Each step was a struggle against the mud trying to trap their shoes. Maria had to carry Joshua for much of the way because the boy, exhausted from crying and the day's emotions, could barely move his legs. She carried her son in her arms, his 40 pounds of weight adding to the weight of her own pain, but Maria did not complain. As she walked, her mind was a whirlwind of fears. How would they sleep? What would they eat? What would happen if Joshua got sick? Anger warmed her body. How could there be so much evil in Elvira's heart? Antonio had been a good, generous man. How had he come from such a cruel woman? After 2 endless hours of walking under the rain that was beginning to subside, giving way to an icy wind, they arrived. Maria stopped short, panting, and set Joshua down on the ground. "Is it here, Mom?" asked the boy. The view was desolate. The ruins was not a poetic name, it was a literal description. Before them rose the skeletal remains of what might once, centuries ago, have been a building. There were 4 thick walls of stone and adobe, uneven, bitten by time and covered in moss. There was no roof. The gray sky was the only hat of that structure. The ground inside the walls was covered with tall weeds, thorny plants, and loose stones. In one corner, the remains of an old fireplace looked like the mouth of a stone monster. There was no door, just an empty hole where the wind whistled in. "But Mom," Joshua's voice trembled on the edge of tears again. "There are no beds here, there's no roof, everything's broken." Maria felt her legs give way. She fell to her knees on the wet grass. She wanted to scream, to curse, to run back to town and pound on the doors of the mansion until her fists bled. But she looked at Joshua, saw the terror in his eyes. If she collapsed now, fear would consume her son. She took a deep breath, swallowing the knot of fire threatening to choke her. She stood up and, summoning a strength that only mothers have when their children are in danger, feigned enthusiasm. "Look at those walls, Joshua," she exclaimed with a false cheerfulness that hurt her throat. "They're castle walls. Look how strong the stones are. We're in an ancient fort." "It's wet," the boy complained. "Yeah, but look, the rain has stopped. Let's clean a little corner." Maria entered the structure. The key Elvira had given her was useless, a cruel joke, because there wasn't even a door to open. She threw the key to the ground with contained rage and began to work with her own hands. Hands that had once caressed her husband's face on silk sheets now began to pull weeds. The thorns tore the skin of her fingers, but she didn't stop. She gathered stones, cleaned a corner protected by the 2 highest walls to cut the wind. "I won't let you defeat us, Elvira," she thought with every weed she pulled. "You threw us in the trash, but we are not trash." Night began to fall, and with it the absolute darkness of the mountain. Far from the town lights, the blackness was total. Maria knew the night would be the hardest test. Without fire, without blankets, hugging each other only to share body heat. "I'm scared, Mom," whispered Joshua, pressing against her side as they sat on an improvised bed of branches and somewhat dry leaves that Maria had managed to find under some rocks. "I'm here," she assured him, wrapping him in her arms and covering him with her jacket, leaving herself only with her thin blouse. "As long as Mom is here, nothing bad will happen to you. You're my brave soldier, remember." Joshua nodded and closed his eyes, overcome by extreme exhaustion. Maria stayed awake. She looked up at the rectangle of dark sky framed by the ruin walls. She saw a single star shining among the dispersing clouds, a solitary star, distant and cold. "Why, my God," she whispered into the night with hot tears sliding down her cold cheeks. "Why have you abandoned us like this? I don't ask for riches, I just ask you. I ask you that my son not suffer." A sound among the stones made her jump. A crunch. Maria groped for a heavy stick beside her. Her muscles tensed. It could be wild animals, snakes, or coyotes. She stood guard with the stick in her hand and her body over her sleeping son. That first night in the ruins was not a night of rest. It was a vigil of terror and survival. Every gust of wind seemed like a ghost. Every shadow seemed like a monster. María, the stripped widow, the woman with a heart of gold, felt for the first time in her life how hatred and determination hardened her soul. She didn't know how or when, but she swore before those old, cold stones that Doña Elvira would regret leaving them there to die. What María didn't know, as she shivered from the cold hugging her son in the darkness, was that she was literally sitting on the answer to her prayers. But to discover it, she would first have to hit rock bottom. The darkness in the hillside ruins was not like city darkness. In the city, or even in the Garcia mansion, the night always had a grayish or orange tint from distant lights. But here, in this godforsaken wasteland, the blackness was absolute, heavy, almost liquid. It was like being inside a tomb with your eyes open. María remained seated with her back against the rough, cold stone of the half-collapsed wall. She dared not sleep. In her arms, Joshua breathed with a halting rhythm, sometimes letting out small moans in his sleep, surely nightmares caused by the day's trauma. María felt each of those moans like a whip to her soul. The cold of the early morning began to seep through her thin clothes. She had no blankets. The only thing separating Joshua from the icy air was the linen jacket María had placed over him and her own embrace. She, on the other hand, felt the ice biting her shoulders, her toes going numb. But the physical cold was nothing compared to the terror she felt hearing the sounds of the surroundings. The wind whistled through the cracks in the ancient stones, creating a mournful sound, as if the ruins themselves were crying. Ugh. Suddenly, María tensed. Her hearing, sharpened by panic, caught something different. It wasn't the wind, it was a scraping. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Something was moving among the loose stones, less than 2 meters from where her son's head slept. Maria's heart began to beat so hard she feared the noise would wake the child. She gripped the stick she had picked up hours earlier tightly. Her eyes tried to pierce the darkness, but it was useless. She saw nothing. The sound came closer. My God, protect him, she prayed mentally, clenching her teeth so they wouldn't chatter. Then the clouds parted briefly, letting the light of a waning moon weakly illuminate the interior of the ruins, and she saw it. Just a few steps from Joshua's leg, a black scorpion, large and threatening, was advancing with its stinger raised, seeking the warmth of bodies. In this place full of cracks, the scorpions were the true masters. Terror paralyzed María for a millisecond. If that animal stung Joshua, weak and exhausted as he was, it could be fatal. They had no car, no phone, no hospital nearby. A sting meant death. The fear disappeared, replaced by a primitive, savage instinct. María was no longer the sweet widow, she was a mother lioness. With a quick, silent movement, she gently separated from Joshua, rose to her knees, and raised the stick with both hands. The scorpion sensed the vibration and turned toward her, ready to attack. Crack! María struck with all the fury she carried inside. She didn't hit once. She hit 2, 3, 5 times, crushing the arachnid and the stone beneath it until her arms ached and her breathing became a ragged gasp. She stayed there panting in the gloom, looking at the dark smear on the ground. Tears welled up again. Hot and salty. She wasn't crying for the scorpion. She was crying because she realized how low they had fallen. Just 24 hours ago, she was choosing flowers for her husband's funeral. Now she was killing vermin with a stick so her son could live one more day. Antonio, she whispered to the empty air. Antonio, look where we are. Why did you leave me alone? I don't know if I can do this. I'm not as strong as you thought I was. But the wind only returned silence. For the rest of the night, María did not let go of the stick. Every time she heard a crunch, her muscles tensed. She imagined snakes slithering down the walls. She imagined wolves stalking in the underbrush. She spent the hours awake, watching over her son's sleep like a guardian at the gates of hell, until finally the sky began to lighten with a pale, sad gray. The light of day revealed the true magnitude of their misery. If at night the ruins seemed terrifying, by day they seemed simply pathetic and dirty. The walls were covered in mold. The ground where they had slept was full of ants and dust. María looked at her hands. They were dirty, with broken nails and remnants of dirt and dried blood from the previous night's effort. Her black mourning dress was wrinkled and stained with mud. Joshua stirred. The boy opened his eyes slowly, confused. For a second, Maria saw in his gaze the hope that it had all been a nightmare, that he would wake up in his soft bed with lavender-scented sheets. But when his eyes focused on the old stones and the open sky above their heads, reality hit him. His little face crumpled. "Mom," he said in a raspy voice, "I'm thirsty." Maria felt a pang in her stomach. It wasn't her own hunger. It was the physical pain of being unable to provide for her son. "Good morning, my love," she said, forcing a cheerful voice that sounded false. "Look, we survived the first night of our adventure. You're very brave." Joshua sat up, rubbing his eyes with dirty fists. "My tummy hurts, Mom. I want milk and bread with butter like Grandma Flora makes," the mansion's cook. The mention of food made Maria's stomach growl. They hadn't eaten anything since lunch the day before the funeral. "Listen, Joshua." Maria crouched in front of him and wiped a bit of dirt from his cheek. Today we have an explorer's mission. Explorers have to find their own food and water. It's part of the game." "I don't like this game," said Joshua, and a solitary tear rolled down his dirty face. "I want to go home. I want my dad." Maria had to bite her lips so hard she tasted the metallic flavor of blood to keep from breaking down and crying right there. She hugged her son tightly, allowing herself that second of hidden weakness. "I know, my life, I know, but now this is our home and Papa is watching over us from above. He wants to see if you can find water. Will you help me?" The mention of his father motivated the boy a little. He stood up, staggering. For the next few hours, Maria faced the titanic task of basic survival. She left Joshua sitting on a safe rock and set out to explore the perimeter of the ruins. The terrain was arid, full of thorny brambles that caught on her clothes and scratched her calves. There was no faucet, no pantry. She found a small stream running down the mountain about 300 m from the ruins. The water looked clear, but Maria knew it could be contaminated. However, they had no choice. She had nothing to boil it with. She knelt, cupped her hands, and drank first. If I get sick, it doesn't matter, she thought. She waited a few minutes. The water was icy and soothed her dry throat. She brought Joshua there. They drank like wild animals crouched at the bank. The water quenched their thirst but awakened their hunger with more fury. For food, the situation was desperate. Maria, who had grown up in the countryside before marrying Antonio, knew some plants. She searched frantically among the weeds. She found some dark purple wild berries and some edible roots. She knew they weren't poisonous, but their taste was bitter and fibrous. She returned to Joshua with a handful of these dirty berries and a couple of roots. "Look what I found," she said, offering him the feast. "They're forest sweets." Joshua tried a berry and wrinkled his nose. "It tastes bad, Mom." "Eat it, son. It will give you strength. It's magic medicine for explorers." The boy ate reluctantly, driven by voracious hunger. Maria ate only what he left, which was barely the peels and the most bruised berries. Her stomach protested, but her mind was focused on another urgency: the roof. The previous night they had almost frozen. If it rained again, they would die of hypothermia. They needed shelter. Maria looked at the ruins. There was one corner where two walls formed a 90-degree angle that still stood firm. If she could cover that triangle, they would have a small cave. She spent the rest of the day working like a beast of burden. She dragged large, heavy branches from nearby dead trees. Her widow's hands, which the day before had held a rosary, now bled dragging dead wood. She broke her nails, splintered her skin, lifted heavy stones to secure the branches over the walls. Her back screamed in pain. Her arms trembled from lack of sugar and protein, but she didn't stop. Every time she felt she would faint, she looked at Joshua, who played sadly with some small stones on the ground, and drew strength from she knew not where. She used mud from the stream mixed with dry straw to try to plug the largest gaps between the wall stones. It was dirty, exhausting, and humiliating work. "Look at me, Elvira," Maria thought with rage as she smeared mud on the wall with her own hands. "Look at me building a house with trash. You think you've defeated me? You have no idea who I am. You have no idea what a mother can do." By mid-afternoon, she had managed to build a miserable lean-to. It was barely a roof of branches, leaves, and mud in one corner of the ruins. It wasn't airtight, it wasn't warm, but it was something. It cut the wind. She sank to the ground, exhausted, looking at her work. It looked like an animal's den. She felt a wave of shame. Antonio, her prince, had treated her like a queen, and now she lived in the mud. The humiliation burned more than the wounds on her hands. The following days passed in a haze of monotonous suffering. 1, 2, 3 days. Maria's small provision of energy was draining. Joshua was pale, with dark circles under his eyes, and had stopped asking when they would go home. He had simply shut down. The vibrant, happy child was becoming a silent shadow that followed her with large, sad eyes. Maria tried to fish in the stream without success. She tried to set bird traps with threads from her own clothing, but failed. Hunger became a constant pain, a cramp that wouldn't let her think clearly. Her appearance transformed. Her hair, once shiny and combed, was now tangled and full of dust. Her black clothes were torn to shreds by thorns and stained with dried mud. She smelled of smoke, from the small fires they managed to make by rubbing sticks together with infinite patience, of sweat, and of desperation. One afternoon, as Maria tried to wash Joshua's shirt in the river by beating it against the stones with impotent rage, she broke. She let the garment fall into the water and covered her face with her dirty hands. A heart-wrenching scream tore from her throat, a howl that startled the nearby birds. "I can't take it anymore," she screamed at the sky. "I can't, Antonio, help me. God, if you exist, don't let me watch my son starve to death." She cried until she had no tears left. She felt like the most miserable creature on the face of the earth. What was the point of being good? What was the point of having loved and cared for her husband? Life was punishing her for no reason. Then she felt a small hand on her shoulder. She turned. It was Joshua. The boy was holding a yellow flower, a tiny wild plant that had grown among the rocks. "Don't cry, Mommy," said the boy with a seriousness that didn't match his age. "Look, I found this for you. It's pretty like you." Maria looked at the flower, a fragile little thing growing in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by thorns. She looked at her dirty, hungry son, but offering her comfort when he was the one who needed it most. That gesture lit a bonfire inside her, a warmth that didn't come from the sun or fire. It was pride, it was pure love. She hugged Joshua and kissed his dirty forehead. "Thank you, my love. It's beautiful, you're right. I won't cry anymore. We're going to be okay. I promise you, Joshua. Even if I have to move the earth with my teeth, we're going to be okay." It was in that moment of determination, as Maria was drying her tears with the back of her hand and putting the flower in her tangled hair, that they heard the sound, a strange sound in that place of silence and wind, the roar of an engine. The sound came from the dirt road below. Maria jumped to her feet, her heart racing. Someone was coming to help them. Don Miguel, the old friend from town, maybe someone had taken pity. She ran to the edge of the hillside with Joshua at her heels to see the road, but when she saw the vehicle, her blood ran cold. The hope that had sprouted a second ago turned to instant ashes. It wasn't a rescue truck, it wasn't a friend, it was a shiny black luxury car, crawling slowly up the rocky road like a giant metallic beetle. Maria recognized the license plate immediately. She knew that car. She had ridden in it many times. It was Doña Elvira's car. Panic seized her. Doña Elvira wasn't coming to bring food. She wasn't coming to apologize. If that woman was coming up to this stone hell, it could only be for one reason. She wanted to make sure they were suffering. She wanted a front row seat to the spectacle of their misery. Maria looked back at her miserable shack of branches and mud, her home. Then she looked at herself, dirty and ragged. "Hide, Joshua," Maria said urgently, gently pushing the boy toward a hole in the wall. "Stay there and don't come out no matter what happens." "Is it the bad grandma?" asked the child fearfully. "Yes, it's the grandma, but she won't hurt you because I'm here. Just don't let her see you cry." Maria smoothed her torn dress, lifted her chin, and stood in front of the entrance to the ruins. Her legs trembled with weakness, but her gaze was steely. She would receive the harpy standing. She would not give her the pleasure of seeing her on her knees. The car stopped a few meters away. The engine died. The door opened, and there began the true psychological hell. The sound of the car door closing echoed like a gunshot in the silence of the ruins. Clack. A dry, expensive, perfect sound. Maria stood motionless, standing before her precarious construction of mud and branches, like a she-wolf defending her den. She smoothed her dirty dress with a nervous movement, useless against the evident misery surrounding her. She knew she couldn't hide the reality. She and her son looked like castaways forgotten by civilization. Doña Elvira got out of the vehicle with calculated slowness. First came an immaculate black high-heeled shoe, stepping with disgust on the pathstones. Then she emerged with her dark sunglasses and a silk scarf tied around her neck fluttering in the mountain breeze. The old woman walked toward them, carefully avoiding the mud puddles that María had crossed barefoot 1,000 times in the past days. She didn't remove her glasses. María couldn't see her eyes, but she felt her scrutiny burning her skin. "Well, well," said Elvira as she came within a few steps. Her voice was calm, conversational, as if commenting on the weather. "You're still breathing. I must admit I'm surprised. I bet my lawyer you'd be back in town begging for alms in the square in 2 days." María clenched her fists at her sides, digging her dirty nails into her palms. "What do you want, Elvira?" she asked, trying to keep her voice from trembling. "There's nothing left for you to take. You've taken everything." Elvira gave a dry little laugh and slowly removed her glasses, revealing those cold, critical eyes. "I haven't come to take anything from you, girl. What could I possibly want from this dump? I've come to inspect my adjacent property. And by the way, I wanted to see with my own eyes how the lady of the house adapts to her true natural environment." The mother-in-law's gaze traveled up and down Maria's body. It stopped on her tangled hair, her torn dress, her bare, calloused feet. "Look at you, María," she whispered with disdain, making a disgusted face. "You look like an animal from the wild, a savage beast. I always knew fine clothes and jewelry weren't for you. Antonio tried to dress you up as a lady, but a monkey in silk is still a monkey. Here, among the stones and dirt, this is where you belong. You're finally in your place." The words pierced Maria's chest like hot needles. Shame flooded her, a red, suffocating wave. She wanted to scream at her that she was a dignified woman, a mother, a beloved wife. But hunger and fatigue had robbed her of the strength to fight verbally. She could only lower her gaze, feeling the weight of humiliation crushing her shoulders. At that moment, Joshua, who had been peeking from the hole in the wall, couldn't take it anymore. Fear of his grandmother fought against a stronger biological need: hunger. He came out of his hiding place, small, fragile, with sunken eyes in his dirty little face. "Grandma," he asked in a threat of a voice. María tried to stop him, but the child ran, staggering, toward the woman who until a week ago had given him cold kisses and expensive gifts on his birthdays. Elvira instinctively took a step back, as if afraid the boy would dirty her. "Grandma," Joshua repeated, stopping a meter away from her. "Did you bring bread?" The silence that followed was deafening. The wind whistled through the cracks. María felt her heart stop. Her son, the grandson of the richest family in the region, was begging for a piece of bread. María took a step forward, trying to rescue her son's dignity. "Joshua, come here, don't ask her for anything." But Elvira raised a hand, silencing María, and looked at the boy. For a second, María hoped to see a flash of humanity. After all, he was her own flesh and blood. He was Antonio's son. How could a grandmother deny food to a skeletal child? Elvira reached into her purse. Joshua smiled weakly, his eyes lighting up with pure hope. He expected a candy, a coin, a sandwich, anything. But Elvira took out a handkerchief, wiped an invisible speck of dust from her jacket, and put her empty hand back. "It's a sin to beg, child," Elvira said with a coldness that froze the air. "Bread is for those who work. Bread is for decent people." "I'm hungry, Grandma," insisted the boy, starting to cry. "My tummy hurts." Elvira let out a short, cruel, humorless laugh. She leaned slightly toward him, not to hug him, but to whisper a sentence. "Then tell your mother to stop whining and start acting. You're in the country, aren't you?" She made a vague gesture toward the rocks full of vermin. "There's a lot of life here. Lizards, field rats. I mean, if you're so hungry, tell your mother to catch rats for you. That's what animals eat, isn't it? And seeing you like this, so dirty, you don't look very different from one." María felt something break inside her. It wasn't pain. It was the sound of submission shattering to make way for fury. Joshua's crying grew louder at his grandmother's response. He covered his face with his hands, ashamed and rejected. María ran to her son, lifted him into her arms, and pressed him against her chest, protecting his ears, his heart, his soul from that witch. Get out of here, shouted Maria. Her voice no longer trembled, it was a guttural roar. Elvira raised an eyebrow, amused by the reaction. Your house. You call this pile of rubble a house? Please, Maria, have a little decency. The old woman walked toward one of the main walls, the one Maria had tried so hard to reinforce the previous afternoon using mud from the river. She looked at it with critical disdain, like a health inspector in a slaughterhouse. This is pathetic, murmured Elvira. Then, with a casual but strong movement, she raised her leg and delivered a sharp kick to the base of the old wall. Crack. The blow made the structure vibrate. A bit of the dried mud Maria had placed with her bleeding fingers came loose and fell to the ground as dust. A small stone rolled. The wall creaked ominously. Maria took a step back, terrified that everything would collapse on them. You're crazy, shrieked Maria. You're going to bring it down, it's our only shelter. Elvira brushed the dust off her expensive shoe, satisfied with the demonstration of the structure's fragility. I'm doing you a favor, you fool, said Elvira, looking her in the eyes with pure malice. You should thank me. These walls are rotten like you. Any day now, while you sleep embraced in your filth, these old stones are going to give way, they're going to come down. She made a dramatic gesture with her hands, simulating an explosion. And they're going to crush you both like cockroaches. She continued with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. And no one, listen to me well, Maria, no one in town will shed a tear. They'll say it was a regrettable accident. The poor widow and her illegitimate son, crushed by their own misery. It will be the poetic end of your sad story. Maria felt she couldn't breathe. The image of Joshua crushed under the rocks, planted in her mind by that woman, made her dizzy. You are a monster, whispered Maria with tears of rage running down her dirty face. God is watching you, Doña Elvira. God sees everything. God is busy helping those who help themselves. Elvira retorted, turning to leave. And you're only good for pity. Enjoy your banquet of rats, dear. Ah, and be careful with the wind. They say it's going to blow strong tonight. I hope your house of cards holds up. The old woman walked back to her car, swinging her hips, triumphant. She had achieved what she wanted. Not only had she seen them suffer, she had taken away their hope. She had planted the fear of death in their own refuge. The car started and drove away, raising a cloud of dust that covered mother and son, making them cough. Maria stood there hugging Joshua, coughing, crying, and trembling. But this time the trembling wasn't from the cold. She looked at the wall Elvira had kicked. The spot where the heel had hit had left a mark. The mud had fallen, revealing a bit more of the deep crack running through the stone. Joshua cried on her shoulder. Mom, we're cockroaches. Are we going to die crushed? Maria gently moved the boy away, took his face in both hands, and looked into his eyes with a terrifying intensity. No, Joshua, look at me. We are not cockroaches, we are not rats. Maria stood up, wiped her tears with her arm, leaving a mud stain on her cheek that looked like war paint. She went to the wall, right where Elvira had kicked. She placed her hand on the cold, old stone. This old witch thinks she can bring us down, she said in a low voice, speaking more to herself than to the child. She thinks these walls are our tomb, but she's wrong. Maria felt a strange vibration when she touched the wall. Maybe it was her imagination, maybe it was the adrenaline, but for a moment she thought the stone was warm. She turned to her son, and for the first time in days, her eyes reflected not desperation, but a fierce determination. Elvira's hatred had ignited a flame that hunger could not extinguish. Joshua, we're going to fix this wall. We're going to make it so strong that not even an earthquake can knock it down. And I swear on your father's memory that that woman will swallow every one of her words. One day she'll wish for the crumbs she denied you today. Maria didn't know how, but she felt something had changed. The harpy's visit, intended to destroy them, had achieved the opposite. It had killed the submissive Maria and awakened the warrior Maria. Night fell again over the hillside ruins, but that night Maria did not sleep for fear of scorpions. She didn't sleep because she stared fixedly at the crack in the wall, that same crack Elvira had kicked. There was something about it. The wind didn't whistle the same way passing through there. It was a different sound, deeper, like a metallic whisper. Be careful, Elvira had said. Any day now it will collapse. Little did the old woman know that in trying to bring down their world, she was about to open the door to a completely new universe. Because sometimes, to find a treasure, you first have to break the surface. And Doña Elvira, in her wickedness, had just delivered the first necessary blow. 2 days after Doña Elvira's cruel visit, the sky over the hillside ruins changed color. It wasn't the usual leaden gray of sad rain. It was a purplish black, a bruised and violent color that foretold disaster. The air became heavy and electric. The birds stopped singing and hid. The silence before the storm was dense, sticky. María, who was washing some rags in the stream with hands full of sores, felt a chill that made her skin crawl. "Joshua," she shouted, dropping the wet clothes. "Joshua, come here right now." The boy, who was stacking small stones near the main wall, ran to her when he saw the panic in her eyes. "What's wrong, Mommy?" "A bad storm is coming. Son, we need to take shelter. Quick, help me get the dry wood under the roof." They worked against the clock. The wind began to blow suddenly, not like a breeze, but like invisible slaps that raised dust and dry leaves, hitting their faces. The sky roared. A deep thunder that seemed to come from the center of the earth made the stones under their feet vibrate. They barely managed to get inside their small shelter of branches and mud when the sky opened up. It didn't rain. It collapsed. It was as if they were under a giant waterfall. The water fell with such force it hurt. The precarious roof María had built with so much effort and pride days before began to leak in seconds. First a drop, then a stream, then the water broke through the branches as if they were paper. María and Joshua huddled in the deepest corner, where the two original stone walls met. María sat the boy on her lap and covered him with her own body, leaning her back to be a human shield against the icy water and the wind trying to tear off the branches. "I'm scared, Mom," Joshua was screaming, but his voice was barely audible over the thunderclaps. "The house is going to fall. Grandma said so." "No," shouted María, hugging him so tight her arms hurt. "These stones have been here for 200 years. They're not going to fall. Close your eyes and pray with me." Crack, boom. Lightning struck a few meters away, illuminating the ruins with a ghostly white light. For a fraction of a second, María saw her son's face lit up. He was pale, terrified, with wide eyes. The wind howled like a wounded animal. The lean-to of branches creaked and shook violently. Suddenly, a stronger gust of wind than the others ripped off part of the improvised roof. The branches flew away and the cold water hit them full force. María began to cry. She couldn't help it. They were soaked, freezing, sitting in the mud. The place she had tried to turn into a home was now a pool of muck. "Why?" sobbed María, looking at the black sky as the water plastered her clothes to her body and got into her eyes. "Enough! You've taken everything from us. Leave us alone." The storm seemed to laugh at her. The rain intensified, and then it happened. Perhaps it was the vibration of the constant thunder. Perhaps it was the water seeping into the ancient cracks of the adobe, softening it. Or perhaps it was the aftermath of Doña Elvira's kick days before, which had weakened the structure at the critical point. A dull sound was heard, a heavy tearing. Crash. Before Maria's terrified eyes, a large section of the interior wall lining, the very wall in front of them, collapsed. Blocks of dried mud and small stones fell to the ground with a crash, splashing dirty water. Maria's heart stopped. She thought the whole wall was coming down on them. "Watch out!" she shouted, turning to cover Joshua completely with her back, expecting the crushing impact that would end their lives, just as Elvira had predicted. She waited for the final blow. She closed her eyes, commending her soul to God. 1, 2, 3 seconds. Nothing more happened, only the sound of the rain. María opened one eye, trembling uncontrollably, and looked over her shoulder. The wall hadn't fallen completely. Only the plaster, the outer layer of old mud and dirt covering the stones, had fallen. Where before there had been a smooth, boring wall of gray mud, now there was an ugly hole, an irregular scar in the wall. "We're okay, my love, we're okay. Just a piece of dirt fell," whispered María, rocking Joshua. The hours passed. The storm roared all afternoon like a beast refusing to die, until finally, exhausted, it began to fade. If you've ever felt that after the storm comes a strange calm, unsettling but beautiful, give this a like now. But listen well, what the rain took away wasn't just mud. The water washed the surface to reveal the truth. If you left now, you'd miss the exact moment when luck changes. And believe me, it changes in a second, in a flash. Are you ready to see what came out of that broken wall? When the rain finally ceased, it was already dusk. The air was cold and smelled of wet earth and ozone. Everything was silent, a sacred silence that only exists after chaos. The dark clouds on the western horizon began to break. The sun, already low, about to hide behind the mountains, peeked out timidly. It wasn't a midday sun, white and harsh. It was the sun of the golden hour, an orange, reddish, intense, almost solid light that bathed the soaked world and made it shine. María stood up, numb. She was soaked to the bone, her teeth chattering, and she felt she had mud in her soul. Joshua, stay here sitting on these dry stones. I'm going to see what we can salvage. The boy nodded, too tired to speak, wrapped in his mother's wet jacket. María walked toward the disaster. The ground was a swamp. Her small bed of leaves was ruined. Her few belongings scattered, but her eyes went to the damaged wall. The section that had fallen during the storm had exposed the internal structure of the wall. María approached to assess the damage, worried that the wall would collapse on them during the night. "Damn this luck," she muttered, crouching to pick up the fallen pieces of mud. "Now I have a hole in my wall. More cold will get in." She stood up and looked at the hole. It was deep. The layer of mud that had fallen was thick, almost 10 cm. Behind it, the stones didn't seem to fit perfectly. There was a deep crack, a dark vertical fissure that went into the wall. At that precise instant, the sun descended one more degree on the horizon. A ray of sunlight, perfect, straight and sharp as a sword of fire, crossed the valley, passed over the wet vegetation, and struck directly against the wall of the ruins. The ray entered the crack. María blinked, blinded by the sudden reflection in the puddle of water at her feet, but when she raised her eyes toward the crack in the wall, she froze. From the deep darkness of that dirty, old fissure, something reflected the light. It wasn't the dull shine of wet quartz stone. It wasn't the glassy reflection of a broken bottle. It was an intense, warm, vibrant flash, a red fire glow and a golden one intertwined. María felt her mouth go dry. Her heart, which had been beating slow and heavy with sadness, gave a violent leap. Thump, thump. What was that? She looked around as if expecting someone else to have seen it, but they were alone at the end of the world. She took a step toward the wall as if hypnotized. Her bare feet splashed in the mud, but she didn't feel it. She only had eyes for that point of light coming from the bowels of her ruined house. The sunbeam would last only a few more minutes before the king's star hid. She had to see what it was. María extended her hand. Her fingers trembled visibly. She didn't want to touch it. She was afraid it was an optical illusion caused by hunger and fever. "It's a piece of glass. It must be an old piece of glass," she said to herself aloud, trying to be rational. "I'll put my fingers in the crack." It was full of wet cobwebs and grit. Her nails scraped against something hard that wasn't stone. It didn't have the rough texture of granite or the smoothness of adobe. It was something made of cloth, of old leather, but it was hard, petrified. María dug with a little more force, breaking the edge of the adobe with her nails. The hole got a little bigger. The sunbeam went deeper. The glow intensified. There it was. She could see a corner of something. It looked like the corner of an old bag, rotted by the centuries, which had torn. And peeking out from that tear like a secret eye was a round object. It was a coin, but not a normal coin, even covered in centuries of dust. Gold does not rust. Gold is eternal. The yellow metal shone under the setting sun with an insulting purity amidst so much poverty. And next to it, trapped in the same mixture of earth and time, was a red stone, rough, uncut, the size of a walnut, a raw ruby. The sunbeam went through it and projected a blood-colored light onto Maria's dirty hand. María pulled her hand back as if bitten by a snake. She took 2 steps back, breathing with difficulty. "My God," she whispered. She brought her hands to her mouth. "My God." It couldn't be true. She was hallucinating. Hunger had driven her mad. Finally, she looked at Joshua, who was still sitting, oblivious to everything, watching the clouds. She looked back at the crack. The sun was beginning to hide and the glow slowly faded, plunging the treasure back into the shadow of the crack. But she had seen it. She knew what she had seen. It wasn't just one coin. Looking closer, she saw that the wall, that entire section of the wall, wasn't made of solid stones like the others. There were patterns, there were filled gaps. That wall was hollow. That wall was false. María fell to her knees in the mud, not from desperation this time, but from the weight of the revelation. Her legs wouldn't hold her. "You're crazy," Elvira had said. "Those walls are going to fall." María began to laugh, a nervous, hysterical laugh that mixed with crying. Tears ran down her face, cleaning the mud. "Mom, are you okay?" asked Joshua, frightened, seeing his mother laughing and crying on the ground. María looked up. Her eyes, once dull and sad, now shone with a feverish light, a mix of fear and euphoria. "Come here, Joshua," she said in a hoarse voice. "Come here." The boy approached. María hugged him and then, with trembling hands, pointed to the dark crack in the wall, where the last sunbeam was dying. "Do you see that?" she asked. "It's dark, Mommy. It's a bug hole." "No, my love," said María, stroking the dirty wall as if it were a lover's skin. "It's not a bug hole. Elvira sent us to live in the trash. She sent us to die in misery, but she didn't know. She didn't know that ruins hold secrets." María picked up a stone from the ground, a sharp stone. The fatigue vanished. The cold disappeared. A wild adrenaline ran through her veins. She had to open it. She had to know if it was real or if it was a dream. "Joshua," said María, standing up and gripping the stone in her hand. "Get ready, because I think Papa just sent us the gift he promised us." She raised her hand with the stone, ready to strike the adobe and break the false wall. The sound of the impact echoed in the silent valley. Crack. A larger piece fell, and what María saw then, what her eyes saw behind that second layer of mud, made her drop the stone and cover her mouth to stifle a scream. It wasn't one bag. They were dozens. They were walled up like bricks. The entire wall was filled. María was standing before an incalculable fortune while outside, night fell over her misery. María was breathing heavily, her heart beating against her ribs like a war drum. The last ray of sun had disappeared behind the mountains, and now darkness began to reclaim the hillside ruins again. But the darkness no longer mattered. María had her own light shining before her eyes. She had broken a bit more of the adobe layer. Her fingers bled, her nails were split to the quick, but the physical pain had completely disappeared, anesthetized by shock. "It's gold, Joshua. It's real gold," María whispered, her voice broken by a nervous laugh that bordered on crying. From the irregular hole she had opened in the wall, she very carefully pulled out one of the objects blocking the way. It was a small sack of black leather, brittle from moisture and years. When she tried to grab it, the rotten leather disintegrated in her hands like ash, and then the rain happened. As the container broke, its contents spilled out. A metallic torrent fell onto the muddy, dirty floor of the hut. Clink, clink, clink. Crash. Coins, dozens of them, large, heavy, irregular. Some shone with the unmistakable luster of pure gold. Others had the silvery tone of oxidized silver, but all weighed an eternity in the hand. María took one. It was cold, had strange inscriptions, ancient crests she didn't recognize. She rubbed the surface with her dirty thumb and the yellow metal shone defiantly. It wasn't a fantasy, it wasn't fool's gold, it was pure, hard wealth. "Are they pirate coins?" asked Joshua, approaching timidly. His little eyes, which minutes before had been dull from hunger, now reflected the glow of the treasure scattered in the mud. "I don't know, my love, I don't know." María began to collect the coins frantically, stuffing them into the torn pockets of her skirt, into her bodice, into her old boots. "Help me pick them up. Don't leave a single one in the mud." Mother and son crawled on the ground, digging like moles in the growing darkness. Every time María touched a coin, she felt an electric shock. With this I can buy bread for a year, she thought, grabbing one. With this I can buy coats. With this I can pay for a hotel and get out of this hell tonight. But the euphoria soon gave way to a much more dangerous emotion, panic. Suddenly María stopped short, stood up and looked around. They had no door, no roof, anyone could see them. The road was close. If someone passed by, if Elvira returned, if some vagrant decided to take shelter there. Maria felt a cold terror that froze her blood more than the storm. Now she had something to lose. Before, if someone entered, they only found misery. Now, if someone entered, they could be killed for what they had. "Hide that," Maria hissed, grabbing Joshua's hand. "Put it all under the stone. Quick." "But Mom, can we buy food?" "No," silence. Maria covered the hole in the wall with the same mud and stones that had fallen, working with a feverish desperation. She wanted to erase the evidence. She wanted the wall to look like just a broken wall, not the entrance to a treasure chamber. That night was the longest of all. Maria didn't sleep a second. She sat in front of the patched wall with a heavy stick in one hand and a sharp stone in the other. Her eyes, red and wide, watched the darkness. Every sound of the wind, every creak of a branch, seemed like a thief approaching. Wealth hadn't brought her immediate peace. It had brought paralyzing fear. She was the guardian of a secret too big for her tired shoulders. Dawn came slow and misty. Maria was still in the same position, rigid as a gargoyle, protecting her sleeping son and her hidden treasure. Around 8 in the morning, she heard footsteps. They weren't car footsteps, they were boot steps, slow, heavy, dragging a little on the gravel. Maria jumped to her feet. Panic seized her. "Who's there?" she shouted, raising the stick. "Don't come closer, I have a weapon." A figure appeared in the morning fog. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, a fishing vest full of pockets, and leaned on a carved wooden cane. Maria lowered the stick slightly but didn't lower her guard. She recognized that silhouette. It was Don Miguel. Don Miguel was the town historian, a 70-year-old man with a white beard and kind eyes behind thick glasses. He was known for spending his life digging in the hills, looking for relics from the old civil wars and local legends. He had been a friend of Antonio's father. "Maria," exclaimed the old man, stopping at a prudent distance and raising his hands in a sign of peace. "For God's sake, girl, lower that. It's me, Miguel." Maria trembled. What was he doing there? Did he know something? Did the smell of gold attract people? "Don Miguel," she stammered. What do you want? We have nothing here, go away." The old man sighed and approached slowly with a look full of pity. "I heard what that harpy Elvira did," he said, shaking his head. "The whole town knows, though no one dares to say anything. It pained my soul to think that Antonio, that his family, was out here in the open. I brought something." Don Miguel took off his backpack and pulled out a thermos of hot coffee and a paper bag with fresh rolls. The aroma of freshly baked bread hit Maria like a punch, weakening her defense. Joshua woke up to the smell. "Bread!" shouted the boy, running toward the old man. Maria couldn't stop him. She saw her son devour the roll Don Miguel offered him and felt tears return to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, dropping the stick and falling to her knees from exhaustion. "Thank you, Don Miguel. May God repay you." The old man poured her a cup of hot coffee. "Here, daughter, you look terrible. That woman will pay for this, I assure you. Karma exists." Maria took the coffee with trembling hands. The heat of the liquid comforted her body, but her mind was still on the wall. Unconsciously, her eyes strayed toward the patch of fresh mud covering the hole. Don Miguel, who had spent 50 years searching for treasures and reading the terrain, noticed Maria's nervous glance. He followed the direction of her eyes, saw the collapsed wall, saw the pile of moved earth, and saw something more. In the mud on the ground shone something Maria had missed in the dark, a solitary coin half buried. Don Miguel approached, curious. "Did the wall fall in the storm?" he asked, crouching. "Don't touch that," Maria shouted, jumping to intercept him. But it was too late. Don Miguel had already picked up the coin. The old man cleaned it with his sleeve, adjusted his glasses. His eyes opened wide. His hand began to tremble. "Good heavens," he murmured. "Maria, where did this come from?" Maria was speechless, her breath cut off. She was discovered. I found it on the ground. It's fake, right? It's old junk." Don Miguel stood up slowly and looked at Maria with an intensity that scared her. But there was no greed in his eyes. There was pure astonishment, the look of an archaeologist before the Holy Grail. "No, Maria," he said in a solemn voice. "This is not junk. This is a Spanish gold ounce from 1790. He walked toward the wall, ignoring Maria's weak protest, and ran his hand over the hole she had tried to cover. With his cane, he gently tapped the adjacent stones. Tap, tap, tap. They're hollow. Do you know what these ruins are, girl? He asked, turning to her. Maria shook her head, crying from fear. Doña Elvira said it was sterile land, that it was worthless. Elvira is an ignorant woman, laughed Don Miguel, an incredulous laugh. Maria, you're standing on the crossroads post. The local legend says that during the War of Independence, a group of smugglers and rebel generals used an old farm on the hillside to hide war funds. It was said they had walled up the fortune before being ambushed and executed in the valley. Miguel looked at the wall, then at Maria's dirty, injured hands. For 100 years, treasure hunters dug in the ground, in the tunnels, in the mountain caves, but no one thought about the walls. They thought they were simple corral walls. The old man approached Maria and put his hands on her shoulders. Maria, do you have any idea what's in there? I saw many bags, she confessed in a whisper. They shone, and red stones. Rubies, sentenced Miguel. The lost treasure of the Sierra. It's not an old wives' tale, it's real, and it's here. Maria felt her legs give way again. Is it mine? She asked. The key. Elvira gave me the key. She put the property in my name. She said it was mine and my bastards. Don Miguel smiled, a wide, complicit smile. If the property is in your name, and if she ceded the ruins and all their contents to you, as surely the deed says, to wash her hands of the legal responsibility for the ruinous structure, then, my dear Maria, according to the law of fines and treasure trove, you are the absolute owner of everything these walls contain. But listen to me well, Maria. Don Miguel's tone changed, became serious, urgent. You have to be very, very smart now. Why? She asked, stroking Joshua's head as he happily ate his second roll, oblivious that he was now a millionaire child. Because this is an immense fortune. We're talking about millions, Maria, millions, and money attracts envy. Don Miguel looked toward the road, toward where, far away in the valley, the great Garcia mansion could be seen. Elvira hates you, the historian continued. She hates you because she thinks you're inferior, but if she finds out that out of spite she gave you the greatest fortune in the region, her hatred will turn to war. She will try to take it from you. She'll use lawyers. She'll use tricks. She'll use force if necessary. She despised me, said Maria, feeling a new strength being born in her chest. She threw me here to die. Exactly, and that's why we can't make mistakes. Don't take the gold out yet. Don't run to the bank with your pockets full. That would raise suspicions. We have to document it. We need the sheriff and a notary here before we move another single stone. Will you help me? Asked Maria, seeking an ally in the midst of solitude. I'm going to protect history, and I'm going to protect you, promised the old man. Because I'd hate to see that treasure end up paying for the whims of that wicked witch. This is divine justice, Maria. God has given you the sword to defend yourself. At that moment, Maria looked at her dirty hands. She no longer saw them as ugly, she saw them as capable. She looked at the broken wall. She no longer saw a miserable refuge. She saw a bank, she saw Joshua's future, she saw university, she saw a house with heating, she saw food in abundance. And then she looked toward the valley, toward Elvira's house. Let her come, whispered Maria with a coldness that surprised Don Miguel. Let her come see what she has done. What Maria and Miguel didn't know was that fate was speeding up the plans. As they spoke, in the Garcia mansion, Doña Elvira was looking out the window toward the hill with binoculars. She had seen the flash. She didn't know what it was, but her predator's instinct told her something unusual was happening in the ruins, and her greed wouldn't let her stay idle. Don Miguel had left just an hour before, promising to return with the sheriff and a notary before noon. Don't touch anything, Maria. Don't even breathe hard. Guard the treasure as if you were a dragon, he had told her with a wink before disappearing down the path with his tired but hope-lightened step. Maria was left alone with Joshua. Silence reigned again in the hillside ruins, but this time the silence wasn't of peace, but of unbearable tension. Maria couldn't take her eyes off the wall patched with mud. She knew what was behind it. Every centimeter of that stone hid ingots, coins, rubies. She knew that there, less than a meter away, was the difference between Joshua begging for alms or going to the best university in the country. She sat on the ground with her heart beating in her throat. Every minute that passed without Don Miguel returning felt like an hour. She looked at the imaginary clock, looked at the sky, looked at the road. "Mom, why are you sweating? Is it cold?" asked Joshua, nibbling on the last piece of roll the historian had left them. "I'm nervous, my love. I'm just waiting for Mr. Miguel to come back to help us clean the house," Maria lied piously. She didn't want to scare the child with the magnitude of the secret. She got up and paced back and forth. She felt an itch on the back of her neck, a dark premonition. Her instinct, sharpened by days of survival and fear, screamed at her that something was wrong. The air felt dense again, even though the sky was clear. Then she heard it. It wasn't the sound of a smooth, luxurious car engine like last time. It was a deep roar, a guttural, mechanical, profound sound. It came from the valley, climbing the steep slope. Maria stopped short. The small stones on the ground began to vibrate, knocking against each other. The water in the puddle remnant of the rain rippled. "Is it thunder, Mommy?" asked Joshua, dropping the bread and running to cling to his mother's skirt. "No, there are no clouds, Joshua." The noise grew louder, more aggressive. It smelled of black smoke, of burnt fuel, that acrid smell that invades the pure country air when industry invades nature. Maria ran to the edge of the hillside to look at the access road. What she saw made her pale until her skin seemed like paper. Coming up the dirt road, crushing the bushes and raising a cloud of gray dust, was a huge yellow machine, a backhoe. Its mechanical arms swayed like the trunk of an iron elephant, and its front bucket shone in the sun, ready to bite the earth. Behind the machine, at a safe distance from the dust, came Doña Elvira's black car. Panic hit Maria in the stomach, like a hammer blow. "Oh my God," she screamed. "No, no, no." She understood instantly. Elvira wasn't coming to insult. Elvira wasn't coming to bring rotten food. Elvira was coming to demolish. If that machine touched the wall, if that bucket hit the false wall, the gold would fall. It would spill onto the ground before Elvira's eyes, before the eyes of the operators. And Maria knew exactly what would happen. Elvira would claim everything. She would say it was on her former land. Or worse, in the chaos of the demolition, the treasure would be buried under tons of rubble, lost forever, or stolen by the workers in the confusion. Or worst of all, the unstable walls would fall on them. "Joshua," Maria shouted, turning to the child with terrifying urgency. "Run behind the big rock, go to the back where we slept the first night and don't come out." "But the machine is coming. I'm scared." "Obey, run." Maria smoothed her dirty hair with trembling hands and ran toward the non-existent entrance of the ruins to intercept them. She had no weapons, no sheriff, only her body and her desperation. The backhoe arrived at the clearing in front of the ruins and stopped, but didn't turn off the engine. The noise was deafening. Black smoke poured from the vertical exhaust, enveloping Maria in a toxic cloud that made her cough. Elvira's car stopped beside it. The rear window lowered automatically. There she was, impeccable, made up, with a triumphant smile painted on her red lips. "Good morning, dear daughter-in-law," Elvira shouted to be heard over the roar of the engine. "I see you're still here clinging to the filth like a tick." Maria planted herself in front of the car, waving her arms. "What is the meaning of this?" Maria shouted in a hoarse voice. "What is that machine doing here?" Elvira opened the door and got out, this time unafraid of the mud because she wore high designer boots. She adjusted her sunglasses and looked at the ruins with feigned disgust. "I've made an executive decision, Maria," said Elvira, walking toward her but keeping her distance. "I was thinking about you yesterday. I thought about my poor grandson living in these unsanitary conditions." "You thought about your grandson," Maria spat incredulously. "You sent us here to die." Interpretations. Elvira waved her hand dismissively. "The point is I've realized that allowing you to live in this unstable structure is a legal risk for me. Remember the crack almost fell the other day. Well, as a responsible citizen, I've decided to demolish the dangerous ruins. Maria felt her blood run cold. You can't do that, she shouted. You gave me the property, I have the key, it's my house. It's a pile of rotten stones, Elvira shouted, losing her composure for a second. And I have a municipal sanitation and landscape cleaning permit. My lawyers are very efficient, dear. They're going to tear all this down. I'm going to clean up the view from my mansion. I don't want to see your rags hanging or your miserable face every morning when I have my tea. Elvira turned to the machine operator, a large man with a helmet and reflective vest who was watching the scene bored from the cab. Go ahead, Martinez, Elvira ordered. Start with the west wall. I want everything down in an hour. The west wall was the treasure wall. It was the wall where the sun had revealed the secret. The excavator's engine roared louder. The metal tracks screeched as they moved forward. The giant bucket rose into the air, threatening, casting a terrible shadow over Maria. Time stopped. Maria looked at the metal bucket. She looked at the wall where her future lay. She looked at Elvira smiling cruelly. If the machine struck, it was all over. She didn't think. There was no time for logic. Maria ran. She launched herself directly toward the west wall and planted herself with her back to the wall, opening her arms in a cross. She stood right in the path of the immense mechanical bucket. No, she shouted with all her might, only over my dead body. The machine operator, surprised by the woman's madness, braked hard. The bucket swung violently in the air, stopping just 2 m from Maria's head. The man opened the cab door and stuck his head out. Mrs. Elvira, shouted the operator. There's a person in the way. I can't work like this. Maria was trembling from head to toe. The heat from the machine's engine burned her face. The fear of being crushed was real, tangible, but her feet were rooted to the ground like roots. Get away, she shouted at the driver with tears of terror running down her cheeks. This is my home. You are not a murderer. Don't do it. Doña Elvira, seeing the machine stop, flew into a blind rage. Her plan of humiliation and destruction was being interrupted by the peasant's stubbornness. She walked furiously toward the machine, her boots hitting the ground. What are you doing? Stopped, you idiot, Elvira bellowed at the operator. I pay you to demolish, not to have opinions. But ma'am, the woman won't move. I could hurt her. Elvira looked at Maria, saw the defiance in her daughter-in-law's eyes. She saw that Maria had lost her fear of the Garcia authority and was now fighting with more than words, and that enraged her more than anything. She couldn't stand disobedience. She'll move, shouted Elvira. She's a coward. No one wants to die for a pile of stones. Then she directed her venomous gaze directly at Maria. Last chance, Maria, warned the mother-in-law, pointing to the road with a gloved finger. Take your son and get off my land forever. Go back to your village. Disappear. Or I swear on my son's memory I'll bring that wall down with you stuck to it. Maria looked at the wall behind her head. She could feel the vibration of the treasure as if the gold coins were singing, asking to be freed. It wasn't just money, it was justice. It was God's retribution. No, said Maria. Her voice was low but firm. She raised her chin. This is my land. You gave it to me, and if you want to tear it down, you'll have to bury me right here. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the diesel engine's idle. Elvira turned red with rage, the veins in her neck swelling. Her hatred for Maria had reached the boiling point, completely clouding her judgment. Very well, shouted Elvira, turning toward the driver. You asked for it. Elvira looked at the operator with mad eyes. Demolish it, she ordered with a sharp shriek. Move forward, knock down the wall, run her over if necessary. She'll move when she sees the teeth of the bucket. Do it now or I'll fire you and make sure you never work in this state again. The order was criminal. It was attempted murder. The driver, pressured by the most powerful woman in the region and fearing for his job, hesitated. He looked at Maria, small and fragile against the wall. He looked at Elvira, red with fury. I said now, shouted Elvira, hitting the metal of the track with her purse. The man, sweat running down his forehead, got back into the cab. He closed the door. The engine roared, revving up. Vroom! Maria saw the bucket rise higher. She saw the hydraulic gears tighten. The machine began to advance, 1/2 meter, 1 meter. The shadow of the bucket completely covered Maria. "Mom!" Joshua screamed from his hiding place, running out when he saw the monster was about to eat his mother. Maria closed her eyes and spread her arms even wider, protecting the crack with her body, protecting the gold, protecting her dignity. "Please, Don Miguel, hurry," she prayed. "Antonio, help me." She felt the wind of the metal approaching. She felt the vibration in her teeth. She was going to die. She was going to die crushed, but she would not move. The screech of metal against stone was about to sound. The bucket was centimeters from hitting the top of the wall to bring it down on her. And in that final second, when the world seemed to end, another sound was heard. Sirens, many sirens. But the machine couldn't stop that fast. The momentum of the blow was already launched. Everything happened in slow motion. Time stretched like an elastic band about to snap. The police siren wailed nearby, growing louder and louder, but the mechanical bucket of the backhoe had already overcome its inertia. The driver, with eyes wide with fear seeing he couldn't brake in time, desperately pulled the levers back, but tons of steel don't stop in a centimeter. The bucket descended. Maria closed her eyes and clenched her teeth, feeling the air displaced by the metal. "Maria, get out of the way." Strong arms, loaded with an adrenaline unfit for a 70-year-old man, wrapped around her waist. It was Don Miguel. The old man had come running from the sheriff's car, jumping over stones and puddles, and threw himself on her like a football player in the last second of the game. Both rolled on the muddy ground, away from the wall just at the instant the steel teeth of the machine impacted the structure. Krakong. The sound was terrifying. The bucket struck the top of the west wall with brutal violence. The old wall of adobe and stone, weakened by centuries and storms, did not hold. Not only was a hole made, the entire structure came down. Maria, dazed and covered in mud in Don Miguel's arms, lifted her head expecting to see a cloud of gray dust and deadly stones. She expected to see the destruction of her only refuge, but what she saw made her heart stop. What all those present saw, Elvira, the machine driver, the sheriff getting out of the patrol car with his hand on his gun, and little Joshua from his hiding place, was something that defied logic. The wall opened like a giant piñata hit by the hand of God. As the false masonry broke, the containers of rotten leather stacked inside the wall burst open. There was no dust. There was a metallic sound, a musical sound. Ting, 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 crash, clink. A yellow cascade poured from the bowels of the wall. Hundreds, thousands of gold coins fell to the ground in a resplendent avalanche. They bounced off the stones, rolled through the mud, clashed against each other. And among the gold, intense red flashes shone. Rubies the size of quail eggs fell mixed with the precious metal. The morning sunlight, which had just fully emerged, struck the mountain of treasure forming at the feet of the collapsed ruins. The glare was so intense it hurt to look at. It was a river of solid fire. The silence following the crash of the collapse was sepulchral. Even the machine, whose engine had stalled from the impact, stopped roaring. No one breathed. Maria slowly got up, trembling. She looked at the mountain of gold before her. It was more than she had imagined. It was the plunder of an entire army. Doña Elvira was petrified beside her car. Her sunglasses had slid to the tip of her nose. Her mouth was open in a perfect, grotesque, her mind, poisoned by years of materialism, took 3 seconds to process what her eyes saw. Broken wall, yellow shine, infinite wealth. Understanding hit her like a lightning bolt. She forgot her hatred for Maria. She forgot her dignity as a great lady. She forgot the sheriff was there. Pure greed, black and viscous, took control of her body. "It's mine," shrieked Elvira in a voice that didn't sound human. The old woman ran. She ran in her designer boots, stumbling, slipping in the mud, waving her arms like a madwoman toward the mountain of coins. "It's my land," she screamed as she threw herself to the ground, kneeling in the dirty muck, staining her $1,000 Chanel suit. "They're my ruins. It's the Garcia gold." Elvira began grabbing handfuls of coins, stuffing them into her pockets, her purse, pressing them against her chest. She laughed and cried at the same time. Her gloved hands clawed at the earth, desperate to possess more. She looked like a demon possessed by gold fever. "Back off," she shouted at Maria, though Maria hadn't moved. "Get away, you thieving peasant. This was in my house. No one is going to take it from me." It was a pathetic scene. The richest woman in town, wallowing in the mud like an animal, blinded by ambition. Maria watched the scene with a mixture of horror and pity. She realized in that instant how truly poor her mother-in-law was. She had money, but she had no soul. "Halt right there," thundered an authoritative voice. Sheriff Ramirez, a robust, serious man who had enforced the law in the county for 30 years, walked toward the pile of gold with his hand on his belt. Don Miguel stood up and helped Maria to her feet, brushing off the dust with protective tenderness. "Sheriff, thank God you're here," shouted Elvira with teeth stained with lipstick and eyes bulging, clutching the coins to her chest. "Arrest this woman. She tried to steal my treasure. It was hidden on my land. I ordered the demolition and found it. It's all mine." The sheriff looked at Elvira with contempt. Then he looked at Don Miguel, who nodded with a deadly calm. "Mrs. Elvira," said the sheriff calmly, "let go of that. It's evidence for now." "Evidence of what?" she bellowed. "It's my property. These are the hillside ruins. They've belonged to the Garcia family for generations." It was then that Don Miguel stepped forward, pulling a folded paper from his old jacket. It wasn't a weapon, but it was much more dangerous. "You are mistaken, Doña Elvira," said the historian in a clear, powerful voice. "Recognize this document." Elvira squinted. That's the transfer deed, the paper I gave to this starving wretch." "Exactly," said Miguel, unfolding the paper slowly for all to see. "You drafted this with your lawyer 3 days ago, and to ensure you humiliated Maria, to ensure she couldn't claim any improvements or furniture that might have remained, you included a very specific clause. Would you like me to read it to you?" Elvira stopped grabbing coins. Her hands began to tremble. Miguel adjusted his glasses and read aloud. "By means of this document, Doña Elvira Garcia cedes the entirety of parcel 404, known as the Hillside Ruins, as well as the existing structure." Miguel made a dramatic pause and looked the witch in the eye. "And all content found within the boundaries of said structure, whether superficial or subterranean, movable or immovable, the Garcia family renouncing any future claim to said goods." Silence fell over the hill again. The wind rustled the document's pages. "You wrote it like that," Miguel continued, relentless, "because you thought there was only trash, rats, and old stones here. You wanted to make sure Maria was left with the trash, but ironically, in doing so, you legally ceded each one of these coins to her. According to state law and this contract signed by your own hand before a notary, the treasure belongs to the owner of the structure." Miguel pointed to Maria. "It belongs 100% to the widow Maria and her son, Joshua." The color drained from Elvira's face. She looked like a made-up corpse. "No," she whispered. "That's a technicality. I didn't know. It's a mistake." "It's not a mistake," Sheriff Ramirez interjected. "It's the law, ma'am, and I have something else for you. I just witnessed you ordering heavy machinery operator to advance on a living person. That's called attempted reckless homicide and endangering a minor." The sheriff took out handcuffs. "You can't do this to me," shrieked Elvira, stepping back and dropping the coins that fell back into the mud. "I'm a Garcia. I have money." "Not as much as her anymore," said the sheriff, pointing at Maria. "Put your hands behind your back, ma'am." The moment was sublime. Elvira was handcuffed, covered in mud and humiliation, while shouting threats that no longer scared anyone. The excavator driver, pale, testified to everything the lady had forced him to do. When the patrol car took Elvira away and the dust settled, Maria stood before the mountain of gold. Joshua came out of his hiding place and ran to her. "Mommy, we beat the bad guys." Maria crouched down and hugged her son. She cried, but this time they were tears of liberation. She had lifted a weight of 1,000 tons off her shoulders. Don Miguel approached and put a hand on her shoulder. "The appraiser will come soon, Maria, but by rough estimate, there's enough there to buy 10 mansions like the Garcias. You are free." "Daughter, you are free forever." Maria looked at the collapsed ruins. The wall had fallen, yes, but in falling it had lifted her up. She took a gold coin from the ground and gave it to Joshua. "Keep it, my love, not to spend it. Keep it to remember that God sometimes puts us in ruins, not to bury us, but so we find the treasure that was hidden." Maria looked toward the clear sky. "Thank you, Antonio," she whispered. "I knew you wouldn't leave us alone." A new beginning. A year passed. Where before there were ruins full of brambles and misery, now stands a beautiful house. It's not an ostentatious, cold mansion like the Garcias. It's a large country house with white walls and a red tile roof, with a garden full of flowers where the town children come to play. Maria didn't move to the city. She decided to stay on her land, transforming the place of her pain into a home of love. She used much of the fortune to build a school for the poor children of the region and a free clinic. She became the most beloved benefactress in the state. No one calls her the peasant widow there. They call her Doña Maria, the one with the golden hands. And Doña Elvira. Elvira spent what little liquidity she had left paying for bail and useless lawyers. She lost the lawsuit, lost the respect of society, and worst of all for her, she lost her pride. She lives alone in one of the rooms of her mansion, which is falling apart because she has no money to maintain it, selling her furniture to eat, bitter, looking from her window at the beautiful illuminated house on the hill, where her daughter-in-law and grandson live happily. Joshua grows strong and healthy, learning history with Uncle Miguel, who is now the family's honorary grandfather. But in Maria's garden, in the center, there is a special monument. Maria left a section of the original old stone wall standing. She protected it with glass. In that wall you can still see the crack. It is a reminder for all who visit, no matter how dark the night, nor how strong the wall that oppresses you. If you have faith and hold on a little longer, you will discover that the greatest blessings often come disguised as collapses. Maria found gold, yes, but her true treasure was discovering that, even without the gold, she had always been more valuable than any coin. She was a mother, she was a survivor, and now she was a legend. Friends of stories to live and dream with, what an incredible journey we have shared. If a tear of joy escaped you seeing Elvira handcuffed and Maria triumphant, you are not alone. This story teaches us that justice is slow, but arrives with force. Now I ask you, what lesson do you take from Maria's story? Comment below the word victory if you believe she deserved every coin of that treasure. Please share this video with someone going through a difficult time to remind them that their ruin could be the beginning of their blessing. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I am Stories to Live and Dream, and I'll see you in the next story that will touch your heart. Subscribe, and until next time.